Hey, y'all, it's Trent on the Loose. Craig Rucker joining us, president and the founder, I believe, Craig, of CFACT. How are you?
I'm doing great, Trent. Hey, thanks for having me on your program.
Well, it sounds like to me that CFACT has had more than a presence on Ladies of Another View, and finally you've earned the right to be on Trent on the Loose, so it's all good.
I don't know. I mean, as I say, the ladies are hard to beat, but yes, I'm excited to be here right now.
No, they're impossible to beat, Craig. But if I don't at least, throw a sticker out once in a while, Patty gets all braggadocious and stuff, and so we'll just go on. Tell us about CFACT.
Yes.
Get us both out of trouble here. Just tell us about CFACT.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'll make an exit from that one. We are a group that's been around since 1985. It gives you a little idea of my age, I guess, that I was a founder. And we work on environmental issues from a kind of a free market, sound science, technology perspective. Generally, that puts us at odds with a lot of the mainstream groups like, let's say, Greenpeace or Natural Resources Defense Council or Environmental Defense Fund. We believe in trying to clean the earth, but we believe it should be done in a way that doesn't hurt jobs, doesn't trample on property rights, and it's based on sound science. So we probably got most of our press taking on a lot of the various things that we think are exaggerated claims, particularly on climate science. And it was good to see that the United Nations actually finally agreed with us within the last few weeks that pretty much everything we've been saying has been true on that.
We're going to talk about that because I don't interpret it the same way, but we applaud what they appear to have as their endeavor. 1985, that's a little bit ahead of the curve, but isn't that about the time that we designated a day in April as Earth Day?
Yeah, actually took place a little bit before that. 1970 was.
Oh, was that long before?
I actually remember that too. I think it was a guy named Paul Ehrlich was popular back then with the population bomb, and a lot of the predictions in that first Earth Day were kind of something worthy of going back and reading. They were predicting half the sunlight and Look magazine back then would be blocked out by air pollution by the mid-1970s. They said 65 million Americans would die of starvation by the mid-1980s. They had many apocalyptic claims that residents of major American cities would have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. And what's remarkable about that, you'd say, well, that's, might have happened had we not taken action. Actually, that's not true. If you were to look at skylines of Pittsburgh or Cleveland or whatever back in the 1900s, then by the 1950s, our air was actually getting cleaner. It's not as clean as it is today, but the trend was just the opposite. And we see, in fact, now with the population far greater than it was back in that first Earth Day, that our air quality has improved by almost every measure.
Craig, that's actually a tremendous approach. If we would go back and find some of those prognostications, so to speak, that the Rachel Carsons, the Paul Ehrlichs, the Maurice Strongs, all of that happened before Al Gore became famous with his nonsense about, the earth just completely disintegrating by 2000. If we would bring to the fore, Time magazine even talked about global cooling. It was the new ice age. If we would bring back all of those predictions, I think it would put a lot of what we deal with today into perspective, just like you did.
And it's exactly true. I mean, one of my favorite things, and I'll be talking to some agri women this week who are coming to Washington about that, is retracing the steps of some of the more bizarre comments that they've made. You look at the climate movement. To me, one of the things that ought to be apparent is that it was based a lot on just hype that never came true. We had predictions back in the late 1980s of, say, New York City would be underwater by the year 2000. We had that first article I read was that palm trees would be on the Potomac in the early 2000s. Now, I was excited about that. I was a young single guy, and I used to have to travel down to Myrtle Beach or Florida to get, go on the beach and that. And, that was exciting. We still don't have palm trees on the Potomac. We had Al Gore saying there'd be an ice-free Arctic by the year 2010, 2012. We even had another scientist from the IPCC saying there would be no more snow. We'd have to teach our children what snow was. And we just got buried this last winter. There's been no change. It's been verifiably true that everything that they've said on major prognostications have just not come to pass. And yet many still believe them.
So let's speak to that early on. Obviously, you and I bang to the same drum. We see through all of this. Have we moved the needle to people that don't typically pay attention are beginning to understand that this has all just been hogwash and it's for their personal profit instead of what's really taking place?
I think so. I think just the election of Donald Trump and others like him, and the appointment of Lee Zeldin at EPA and Doug Burgum over at Interior and Chris Wright at Energy, to me, it's a kind of a sign of the times are changing. I actually had the privilege of introducing Lee Zeldin just about a month ago in a Washington event, and I was tickled by what he said. He said, "You guys have been saying this at CFACT, Heartland Institute. There's been others, Competitive Enterprise Institute. I've been saying this for a decade. You've probably been wondering when you'd be vindicated." He said, "Well, I want to tell you, now your vindication comes." And they've done a great job at EPA and rolling back a lot of the excesses, electric vehicle mandates, trying to gut our energy and make it all renewable and get rid of our natural gas and the like, and coal. They wanted to have this endangerment finding, which would be just awful. The way that they've been implementing it would, at the end of the day, the government would have the right to regulate just about everything we do in agriculture, industry. It's been a trampling of property rights, too, with the WOTUS legislation, Waters of the United States. This is all being systematically rolled back at a greater pace than I could have ever imagined 10, 20 years ago. And so I think there is reason for encouragement. We're seeing it right now. Now, whether this will be long-lasting or not, that's another thing.
So while I applaud this team for saying the right things, I don't see the right things happening on the ground. Lee Zeldin's been talking about rolling back emissions and all these Tier 4 emissions standards that are going to go away. Nothing has changed other than the rhetoric about it. I mean, Chris Wright and Lee Zeldin, I have confidence that they want to do the right thing. It appears as, and then the disaster over at the USDA, and of course my audience is not going to have a good thing to say about what Doug Burgum ever says, because he just continues to lie. So the right things are coming out, Craig, but I don't see the right action on the ground.
And I can understand that. There sometimes is a bit of a delay. I would actually, I've been a little disappointed in Burgum myself. I've been suing on the offshore wind project, trying to stop some of those. And, Trump issued an executive order to stop them. And, some of them just bellied up and went down. But I have been disappointed that Doug Burgum has not been pressing that issue a lot faster, because a lot of these other projects could have been stopped if he would have just followed through on the executive order. That said, on other issues with the rollback of the endangerment finding, getting us out of the Paris Accord, not just the Paris Accord, but the original UN Convention on Climate Change, which President Trump just did back in January. I think that these will have profound impact over time. So I just say we give it a little bit of time. So it took a while for them to get in there. It's going to take a little bit for them to get out, but they're on the right direction. And they are listening to us, and they are doing the types of things that I think will bring about an energy renaissance given time.
I want to talk about Wyoming and the reason we came together. But before we go to a break, the one person who irritates me more than any, Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Ag of the USDA, on August 17th, coming up on a year ago, Lebanon, Tennessee, she point blank said, not one more acre will be covered by solar panels or wind turbines. And Craig, I can find a solar panel or wind turbine project that has been approved in every state every week since that happened. It's getting pretty irritating that we have all these limitations being put on farmland, USDA saying the right thing, but it doesn't happen.
All I can say is amen to that. And, I can bring up that we're going to be going to Wyoming to oppose, several. The rail tie wind project is a big one out there that's set to blanket a bunch of the western part of that state. I just came from Oklahoma also, where we're trying to stop the eastern part of Oklahoma from being blanketed with wind turbines. And these are in red states with the blessing of a lot of Republican and GOP leaders, and it's really disappointing because the residents there are very upset by it, and they're just going after the money.
Craig Rucker, my guest, coming to us from CFAC. We'll take a break. We'll come back and talk more about that Wyoming Wall of Wind rally that is going to take place next week in Cheyenne. We'll be there. You should be there as well. We're back with more Trent on the Loose after this. Welcome back. Trent on the Loose. Craig Rucker joining us. He's with CFAC. 1985. I can't believe how you're such a pioneer in this deal.
Yeah, it was a little odd. When I started this organization, basically the environment was kind of it was a stomping grounds for those on the political left for the most part. Of course, I grew up in a rural upstate New York area. So for me, I grew up chopping firewood and hunting and all that type of thing from upstate New York. And it was surprising when I went to college that I met all these people from New York City and that, many who couldn't tell the difference between a possum and a raccoon, yet they were accusing me of not being an environmentalist. And I just found that odd. I noticed when we look around the country, it's in the red areas closest to nature. These are the people that I believe don't have the representation and know the most about nature. So part of our reason for founding this was to try to reclaim the environmental movement for those who had more traditional values.
Speaking of upstate New York, I recently spoke there to Northeast Feed Alliance, which is primarily dairymen these days. And a lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of them from New York. And the New York dairy sector continues to be challenged from policies in the state, not federal, both federal, but mostly state. Were there but still talking about having 100% electric vehicles, including feed trucks and semis and all of these things? Craig, there was not one dairyman that I talked to that was optimistic that if all of these things come to pass that the current administration in New York was putting in play, not one of them looked at me in the eye and said, I'm optimistic we're going to still be in the farming business in 2031. I mean, this is about our food supply, and food supply is a means of national security. Are we getting that fixed?
I think we may be. I mean, my grandfather was a farmer from Western New York, and used to help him out there. He said that I better go and get a different job. I'd be a hungry farmer. But it was quite an experience back then, going to the Buffalo market and everything. And I just don't see it right now. A lot of these are run out of business. They're sad. I have some good friends who are even in the mushroom farming business out in Albany that are having a hard time of it. And they're sitting on a gold mine. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting is we did a documentary on this a few years back, looking at Pennsylvania versus New York. Pennsylvania, they went full bore on fracking, as you may know. And a lot of these farmers invested, allowed these fracking companies to come on where they were and made a gold mine. They were able to stay in business in Pennsylvania, and they continue their farming. It's not as intrusive as, let's say, a wind farm, which just takes up acres and acres, or a solar farm. And this has enabled them to prosper, keep their family farm and their, operating. New York, of course, banned fracking. And so these farmers don't have access to any of that money, and they're having a tougher go of it. And leave alone the fact that you're right on the state level issues. You're going with Governor Hochul up there, who's just like, a wrecking crew, as is that legislature in Albany, which is very tilted to the Democratic side. And a lot of them, I mean, you're talking about a state that has New York City and Mondami as a mayor. So it's very steep to the far political left.
The other thing I want to talk about, which plays right into what we're going to do in Wyoming next week, that is that, for a long time, and you mentioned Oklahoma, and they were one of the first to lay the groundwork for big wind projects. And I'm in the Southwest Power Pool, being part of Nebraska Public Power District. And Southwest Power Pool has about 40% of the total electricity supposedly coming from wind. So they've been on the forefront of that. But Craig, what I'm seeing, and I want to know how this plays into what you've been working with at CFACT, what I'm seeing is that there was a project of wind came along, and then there's projects of solar, and these solars always include this battery storage unit. And all of that was just a precursor, knowing that in 2026, 2025, 2026, we're just going to slam everybody in every county with these AI data centers, which consume more water than is on Earth and want to generate, are going to have a thirst for power that we can't simply provide. But it's clear to me now, this has been probably planned about the time they had that first Earth Day in 1970. We just happen to be living here to be a part of it. And I get 4 to 6 phone calls a day to figure out how to stymie what is happening with these AI data centers. How do you see that all playing out?
Yeah, it's a disaster in the making in both cases. I mean, the AI data centers, where they're siting them, there certainly isn't the electricity to power them. I think I'm going to agree with what Chris Wright and President Trump are trying to do. If they are sited, that's a matter of local concern, and it requires local support. But if they are sited, they should definitely provide for their own electricity and not try to sap the power grid. And in fact, the same is true with their water supply. So these have to be self-contained things where they're allowed to exist, and certainly where citizens are not wanting them to go in, they should have that input. That's part of our democracy. So, from our perspective, I will say this one thing. I do think that solar and wind are ill-equipped to be able to provide enough juice for AI data centers. And that's not just me saying that. I mean, that you even have the people who I generally don't agree with, like the Bezos and the Bill Gateses and all those who are behind a lot of this stuff. They even acknowledge that solar and wind is not going to be sufficient for what's doing it, which is funny because they've been backing solar and wind forever, except for now they need actual real power because they're now behind a lot of this data center push. And now they realize, maybe we messed up and we need to get gas-fired plant, nuclear power, something else, because this isn't going to be enough. But we've already despoiled vast stretches of our states with these blights on solar and wind that are not going to be able to service a growing electricity demand that some states are moving on with the data centers and the like. And as far as the citizen pushback goes, to be understood, who wants a big ugly data center in your community necessarily? So, as I say, this is going to have to be something that's zoned wisely. I don't know how a particular state's going to want to weather that storm or where they want to place them, but I do know that solar and wind is not going to be sufficient to generate the electricity for them.
All right, I'm not doing this just to tease people along. We're going to take our break now, and then we're going to have a good discussion when we come back and wrap up with what is taking place in Cheyenne, a city that has already approved 12 gigawatts of electricity for 2 separate AI data centers. That's 7 times the amount of electricity the entire state of Wyoming uses. That includes coal mines. Just think about that. We'll be back with more Trent on the Loose. Craig Rucker after this. Welcome back, Trent on the Loose. Craig Rucker joining us. He's with CFACT. What are we doing in Cheyenne next week on June the 4th, Craig?
Yeah, we're going to be holding a rally, trying to draw attention to all the different efforts across the state to bring in some wind power to a state that we think is not going to be able to subsist on it as a major energy source. As you just mentioned before the break, we have AI data centers coming in there that are going to be needed. They don't have necessarily the connecting transmission lines for it. These things will be a detriment to eagles, as of course some of them are being placed right in the middle of corridors where endangered species go. they're just a problem. And so a bunch of us are going to get there. And these are farmers, ranchers. We're hoping some indigenous peoples as well, protesting against the growth of this particular energy with 3 projects that are going on around the state right now. I guess they already have like 20 some, but the 3 latest ones that they're having that are particularly in the Laramie area.
Yeah, and the reason that it's called the Wall of Wind is because my friend Wendy Volk has figured out that she's looked at the plan long-term for Wyoming, and it's literally just a wall of wind turbines to encompass the entire thing. And Wyoming offers so much in terms of resource accessibility and the wildlife and the ecosystem. All of that will be destroyed if this wind project is allowed to process. By the way, they've not had a permit in Laramie County. They have in Platte County, the neighboring county to the north by Chugwater. But where are the successes in what we've been working on here so far with CFACT, Craig, along these lines?
Well, we've had successes. I would say one of the biggest ones is the offshore wind in general. That has been acknowledged. Now, there's 5 projects that remain, but there's a whole bunch of them that we've been able to stop, ranging all the way from Rhode Island and Massachusetts down to the Carolinas. So most of the major projects off of New Jersey, off of Maryland, North Carolina, have all been stopped, and that's actually good news. We've also stopped a fairly big one out in Humboldt area in California. We are working right now to stop some of them in Texas. So there's been a number of them that have bellied up. In fact, I think it was one of our good friends, Robert Bryce, who follows energy issues, says over the last 6-7 years, something like 820 or 30 communities across the countries have rejected solar and wind projects in their area. And we've been involved with a good many of them. So we're kind of proud of that. But of course, there's many more that were cited. So it's not a track record of saying it's great success. So, but we've been happy with it.
Craig, how can a state like California, when you look at the lack of a reliability, you look at, if you exclude Hawaii, California is now at 40 cents a kilowatt hour, which is over double the national average. How can they even consider continuing down this erroneous path for a reliable, affordable supply of electricity? It makes no sense to me.
And I think they're being bailed out by states like where we're going to be going to, Wyoming. We also oppose the Lava Ridge, and Trump, of course, signed an executive order against that. That was a big one in Idaho. If you looked at that project in particular, as are a lot of other ones being done, it's all energy being funneled from red states like there in a renewable sense out to California. Very little of it's being retained by the local populace. California is an energy net importer. Outside of what they could get from Utah, from Arizona, and places like that, they'd be up the creek without a paddle. So they're able to get away with this whole green madness based on that. And you see the same in the Northeast with states like New York and, Connecticut and New England states. Pennsylvania, West Virginia, PJM, which is the big, one who monitors the electricity up there. They're relying on West Virginia and Pennsylvania to give them their base load to be able to supply that whole thing.
This really isn't a tough fix, Craig. The big ugly bill, which is not what everybody else calls it, but what I call it, it ceases the 45Q and Z tax credit, the production tax credits for wind and everything else that wind and solar, and I'm going to include CO2 pipelines, has in it, if they're not permitted by December 31st, 2027. If it had gone into effect immediately, we would have, it would be gone. It wouldn't be a problem. Why didn't we have the foresight to do that?
It was, we at CFAC were actually wanting that to happen, and we pushed very hard for it. But there's some strong interest, and it's bipartisan. As I say, the sad part is that there are a lot of Republicans that have hitched their wagon to the wind and solar, train. And what they're doing is they're getting either money for their campaigns, or they themselves maybe have and I'm not talking hypothetically. I've actually looked at these, but I'm not going to name names. But you can look at certain landowners. They may be big Republicans or conservatives or libertarians, but they plan to make a killing off of wind. So that taints it, and it's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, and there's too many out-of-country LLCs that are taking taxpayer dollars to do this. Craig, where do people get more information about CFACT?
Certainly, they can reach us at cfact.org. That's cfact.org, and you can sign up. You get a free newsletter, and you can find out more about these and many other issues.
Thank you, Craig. Look forward to seeing you in Cheyenne next week. God bless the veterans and the farmers who feed us.